Hi everyone, thanks for stopping by and seeing what I'm up to. So, this is my introduction to my video. I am bringing to you with me in the corner, quiet as a mouse. I will make sure my introduction gets in front of the actual video this time. I'm very, very sorry. Thanks again. Like, subscribe, and share. This is Silky signing off. Bye.
Hey everyone, me Kevin here. The protests over the weekend and riots have finally led to some renewed calls for more stimulus within the Senate. Let's go through the details in this video, but first, do you remember the airline bailouts? The airlines recently received over $25 billion in grants as long as the airlines agreed to pay their employees through September 30th. So the airlines agreed. They took the bailout money and they wouldn't, or agreed at least, not to lay anybody off until September 30th. So guess what the airlines are doing now? They're planning their layoffs for September 30th. And now are warning that, yep, hey, it's coming, so you may as well get ready for the axe to fall. And this at the same time as our country is falling into chaos. You can't help but feel like there's a lot of hope missing. In fact, last week we heard some discouraging news from a group of Democrats in the Senate that they weren't so confident in the need for another round of stimulus checks. And a lot of people were like, what? Like the Democrats? So there were the Democrats in the Senate saying no to more stimulus checks? Well, that's not good. Well, the Senate is back to work this week. In fact, they meet today at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and committees are scheduled for tomorrow. But the big thing that we're seeing now is calls from another group of Democrats in the Senate for more stimulus and more relief, especially following the protests and riots that we've seen over the weekend. And while this is, of course, no sign of a guarantee that any of their ideas are actually going to happen, it is nice to know that at least it somewhat feels like somebody at the moment is looking out for the people who need relief the most. Now, as usual, I just want to be super clear. By me saying that, I'm not trying to side with them. That is, I'm not trying to side with these Democrats looking at these three ideas for additional stimulus, but it is nice to know that there are people in the Senate who are, at the moment, putting people, especially poorer folks, at the high end of their priority list. Remember, Jerome Powell warned that for the entire country, that is rich, middle-income earners, and poor earners, to not be permanently scarred, for our economy not to be permanently scarred, we have to lift everybody up. Everybody has to win. And so here are the three things this group of senators are calling for. And by the way, some of these things were kind of forgotten and cast to the side until these protests broke out, reiterating the need for help. Because remember in the last few videos that I've been making on the racial disparity between whites and blacks and income inequality? Well, one of the big bottom lines was that violence doubles when you fall below the poverty rate. And right now, there are a lot of people not only without jobs, and sure, some of them might be getting unemployment insurance payments, but hey, a lot of that gets offset if you also just lost your health insurance. Because health insurance doesn't get extended when you lose your job. Now all of a sudden, health insurance that was paid for you is on you. And so yeah, you could pay overpriced COBRA to extend your health insurance, or you just make the choice and say, you know what? Oh well, I can't afford healthcare, and you cross your fingers that you don't get sick in the middle of a pandemic. It's pretty bad. As you can see, there are a lot of things keeping the poor people poor. And yet another reason why the wealthier are being taken care of through corporate bailouts, the Federal Reserve policies in the form of increased stock prices and bailouts. And well, we're leaving a big part of our country behind. So here are the three proposals that are currently being looked at by this other group of senators, and this is something to pay attention to. Number one is the Paycheck Security Act. The Paycheck Security Act would guarantee 100% of paychecks for workers up to $90,000 in wages at businesses whose revenues fell by 20%. And now it couldn't be used at the same time as like PPP funding, the Paycheck Protection Program, but it could be used after the PPP money is exhausted. So it would create another way for businesses whose revenue has gone down to be able to continue to pay their workers. And it would also allocate money for benefits like health insurance. Now, we'll get to stimulus checks in just a moment, but something that I do want to mention is this makes it very clear that businesses are also required not to lay anybody off if you take that money, which is so frustrating because that's kind of exactly what we're seeing the airline industry do. And I mean, in some sense, you can't blame them because, travel's way in the toilet, but it's just frustrating that companies that got bailouts are now basically still going to end up laying people off. But anyway, these grants would also cover other things, up to 20% for other things like rent, insurance, maintenance, and other fixed costs that businesses have. So that kind of covers businesses. Now let's talk more about individuals, including healthcare and direct stimulus payments. And who are these senators that are making this call? The Senate, very, very important right now. Remember, they're going back into session this week, starting today. Also, a quick reminder, get your 2 free stocks with Webull when you deposit just $100 and get your life insurance linked down below. Remember, the 2 free stocks are worth up to $1,400 with Webull. This video is sponsored by Webull and the life insurance company, link below. Check it out. That's what Lauren and I have. Now, the second thing that folks in this Democrat group are looking at is they're looking at healthcare for people who specifically were laid off and lost their healthcare benefits. So there's this proposal called the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act. And this basically guarantees that everybody would qualify for healthcare if you were laid off, regardless of your income. Basically, it just means the government's going to pay your healthcare if you're laid off. Okay, well, that's that. And then, remember the proposal? The one that's $2,000 of stimulus payments per month proposed by Kamala Harris, along with Mark Warner, Doug Jones, Richard Blumenthal, and Bernie Sanders and Cory Booker. You've got kind of a large group of Democrats here, right? In fact, on Saturday, May 30th, over a month after some of these proposals were initially proposed and then forgotten, Mr. Sanders, on behalf of this other group of Democrats, the ones actually for these additional benefits, issued a renewed call to leader Mitch McConnell asking for the inclusion of these programs into the next stimulus bill. Now, I'll go through the details of that in just a moment, but listen to some of the verbiage they're using here, and you can see how it really relates to exactly what's happening in our country right now. Now, quote, given the enormity of this crisis, it is incomprehensible for Senator McConnell to tell us that he sees no urgency in passing the next stimulus relief bill and that he wants to wait another month before taking action. The American people cannot afford to wait another month. Our most valuable communities are hungry, desperate, and under enormous emotional stress. The American people want action from Congress, and they want it now. And that makes sense. That reiterates a lot of what we're hearing on social media and what we're actually seeing amongst people who need help. There are a lot of people right now who need help. This is why we always have that fundraiser on this channel for No Hungry Children, because there are children who aren't getting enough food during this time, which is just terrible to think about. But anyway, this $2,000 per month proposal is actually different from the one that we're used to. We're used to the Emergency Money for the People Act, which was proposed in the House of Representatives by Tim Ryan and Ro Khanna. Well, this $2,000 per month stimulus proposal proposed by Kamala Harris along with Bernie Sanders would actually offer everyone $2,000 per month retroactively through March. That is, you would get $2,000, your spouse would get $2,000, and you'd get $2,000 per child, up to 3 dependents worth, per month, going back to March and until 3 months after the pandemic is over. And they actually go as far as saying, look, this isn't only for relief purposes. The point is to also stimulate the economy. and anyone making under $120,000 per year in income would be able to qualify for this. Now look, as recently as a week ago, we know that Republicans and Democrats pushed aside other forms of relief and stimulus, but this outburst and sort of our country falling into crisis via these protests and riots, and yes, I know that there are calls suggesting, well, these riots and protests are being, agitated by anarchists and Antifa. You've got either far left-wingers, you've got far right-wingers, and you know what? It's probably true that some of these groups are agitating these protests, but the bottom line is protests are still occurring by and with people who are struggling. And these should clearly be seen as the opportunity for Congress to act, not only in the ways that I've outlined in other of my videos, like addressing police brutality, addressing judicial reform, and addressing other forms of education for de-escalating with officers, and of course also preventing racial discrimination, but the big thing that we're seeing here is a push towards more stimulus money. And again, I don't want to come across as saying, hey, just give everybody money to shut up and go home. I think that would be a byproduct of, hey, if y'all go home, here's stimulus, right? Obviously. But the big thing is we're finally seeing more of a push again in the Senate. And right now we're on day one back to work. So let's keep an eye on how this develops. But to me, at least this is a good sign of movement in the right direction. That is more relief and help for people. Now, again, this is a Democrat group in the Senate. So some might look and say, hey, come on, Kevin, they're powerless. But their voices still get heard, and at least they're there and pushing for it. It'd be worse if literally nobody was pushing for additional stimulus. Hopefully this gets Republicans and Mitch McConnell to move faster, especially in response to the protests that are happening now. Because I think everybody right now is not just looking for hope, but we're looking for action. Let's see that action. If you like my content, please...
Bye.